Hello, everyone, and welcome to Meeple Leaf Reviews. I'm Jeffrey, and I'm joined by...
Hi, I'm David.
And today we're going to be doing a before and after, where we take a look at a game before and after our very first play, giving you our initial expectations and then first impressions. Today we're going to be taking a look at John Company. Now, I heard about this game from a podcast that I listened to called The Deep End, and really that is the only place I've ever heard about this game.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you told me that because you told me you wanted to play John Company. I had never heard of this game, so I started digging around, and up till now, there actually hasn't been a lot of informative content for me to actually figure out how to play this game. So if it wasn't for Jeffrey, this game would not be on my radar at all.
And this game 2 is probably one I've spent the most time invested into learning. We were recently talking about how I never set up a game and move pieces around to learn a game. After I read through the rulebook the first time, I was like, okay, there's something happening in this game, I'm sure, but I'm not quite sure what it is. So I set up the game and kind of went through a round by myself, and I was like, okay, this is making a lot more sense. So then on my second and third read of the rules, things kind of started clicking together.
And you even made a really nice 4-page rule summary for the rest of us to follow along.
It's up to 6 pages now.
Whoa, okay. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to going into this. So I guess maybe you should tell us, what are your expectations then, Jeffrey?
So going in, one of the first things that I wanted to touch on was, it says that this is a sandbox game. So lots of cool things that are going to be in this game to explore, I think. But I always find when I play a sandbox game for the first time, I usually just end up sifting the sand instead of actually making or building or doing anything with the sand.
Well, yeah, and on that point, if it is indeed going to be more of a sandbox game, and there's so many scenarios listed here, and there's lots of things going on, I almost kind of feel that at the end of this, when we do our first impressions, that our first impressions might in fact be wildly different than other people's first impressions, because it also seems to be a game heavy in negotiation,
right.
And so that's going to be largely group dependent, I think. So honestly, when it comes to playing games with Jeffrey, the negotiation is usually what's worse for Jeffrey,
Yeah, exactly.
and then we go from there. But
it makes victory all the sweeter when I win.
Yeah. So because of the large nature, the large scope of this, the sandbox nature, I have zero expectations about this game, and I expect even after the first play, I'll continue to have zero expectations, because the first play we're going to be focused on mechanics and the little part of the sand that we're in. All I do expect is that to commit to you at least 4 to 6 plays of this game so that we can begin to experience the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely this is going to be a learning game. We're not even going to know levers that are going to be there. What I'm hoping after this first play is that I can kind of get a glimpse of the layers and the levers in the game so that it gets me excited for future plays. Honestly, this is the first game going in that I'm not sure if I'm going to like or dislike the game. Even after all this time I've invested, I'm just not sure. It's intriguing me how interesting it is and how kind of different from anything else I've played.
Well, and I'm also going to watch for you to see if there's going to be a work bias, because you put so much work into learning how to play this game. I want to see if that's going to bias your initial impressions. Well, I love this game because I've spent 12 hours figuring out how to play, so of course I love it.
A couple other things I want to touch on quickly that I'm kind of interested in and got me intrigued for the first play is it's kind of a semi-co-op nature, where you're all these different families trying to run the East India Trading Company, but you need to work together at some times. You can't just let the company tank because you're also invested in the company. So it's not like, hey, let's help each other because we want to. It's like, no, we need to help each other sometimes. So I think that's going to be cool. The managing the investments and the risk. So which regions do you invest in? I think that's going to be the most difficult thing to try and figure out, especially in the first play. I think that's going to be very opaque because there's going to be events that are going to happen in India. Might be revolts or collapse, or things are going to flip to depression. So just not knowing kind of what might happen, I think is going to be cool. So also to mention, it recommends in the rulebook to play without events. Screw that.
Yeah, screw no. Whenever we have the opportunity to play the full game, even right from out of the gates, we always do.
Yeah, I think the events is going to give the game its flavor throughout.
Yes, and even about this, going back to you're talking about whether or not you want to work together, keep the company afloat. I saw the designer in some of the BGG threads was basically mentioning there's these different objectives, these personal objectives, and sometimes you want the company to actually tank for your own personal
For your own
benefit. And he was saying, in fact, there's only really one of those that are out there, and the rest are kind of you want to keep that company on the teetering edge. And so, I'm curious to see how that's going to work.
Yeah, how much money do you siphon off for yourself, but leave invested in the company so you don't hurt your position?
But I think that takes us to the other point you also mentioned as well, is like how do you understand the different layers of the game. Is I want to kind of talk about the negotiation aspect of this, because negotiation to me has it's going to be group dependent.
Yeah.
So we're going to see how that works for our group. And the other thing is, for a negotiation game, especially one with all of these different layers, sandbox game that we're describing it as, what's the value of things? And so I think that's going to take not one, but perhaps 2, 3 players, because as you begin to explore different parts of the sandbox, then the relative value and importance of these things will also change.
Yeah.
And so I'm really curious to see how that plays. But the thing I think is really cool about the negotiation here are those promise cubes.
Yeah.
You got to give your family member over, and that's going to actually have consequences at the end of game scoring.
Yeah, you know that's -2 points at the end. Whatever you're trading for and giving that away, you better hope that you're getting at least 2 victory points, or be able to kind of get it back into your pool. So yeah, I think I like that there's a little bit of a concrete nature to some of the things that you can trade. The other thing that I wanted to mention about this game is that there's going to be dice rolling. Mm-hmm. Not a huge fan of dice rolling.
Okay, yeah, I'm aware of that.
But I don't know. I think this is going to mimic the volatility and the just unknown of what your investments. I don't think you could play the game without the dice rolling. I'm just not sure if I'm going to like the dice rolling in the game.
Well, and that being said, is when I was reviewing the different comments for the different level scores that people put on Board Game Geek, that basically, as a rule, it seems that people who rate this game 7 or less have an issue with the randomness, and people who rate it higher have no problem with the randomness. And basically, the people who rate it even lower, like 3 or 4 out of 10, are saying this is way too chaotic of a game. So for me, for this type of randomness, it's something I need to experience, because there are mitigating factors throughout there. Because they got the penalty factors, which take away from your
from
roll,
how many dice you can roll.
And then they also got you can pay extra to boost things up a little bit.
And you also have the balance of India. That can affect how bad the events could be there.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to it, to be honest with you. But again, some of the other comments that people were saying was, well, even at the end when you're doing the attrition, whether to decide whether or not your guy is going to retire, booted. And that's the way you're going to get points in this game. Some people, again, that rated this game low said, well, basically the points I'm going to earn comes down to a dice roll.
Right.
And so they really set them off a little bit. So I'm kind of curious to see how that's going to be mitigated throughout the game and how it's actually going to play out. So as I'm with you, there are definitely a lot of random elements throughout here. But when you read through it, like, okay, there looks like to be ways to mitigate this.
Like, for example, the higher up you are in the company, the more likely you are to retire. So trying to get higher up means you're more likely to get booted at the end of a turn.
Yeah, so, because I believe it's a 4, 5, or 6 that you need to roll, right? So I'm looking forward to actually seeing the randomness. And as you say, if it does actually mimic the volatility of this, then I'm kind of excited about that, because that's something we don't know even in the real world. The other thing is, speaking of the volatilities, one person even made the comment, if you go on Wikipedia and research this era, a lot of it basically can be replayed through this game. So again, for games that actually have a historical flavor to them, or represent a historical period that I wouldn't otherwise have paid much attention to, I'm always interested in those types of games for my own learning. Yeah,
like I know next to nothing about the East India Trading Company, so it'll be cool to kind of play through this era. So I think that should be about it for my initial expectations. Anything else you want to be?
No.
So let's get it to the table and see if we understand the game, and we'll come back and see what our first impressions are.
Yeah, let's do it, Jeffrey.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. You may notice...
Are we wearing different clothing?
We're wearing different clothing.
Oh, okay.
It's actually a different day. So when I was editing the John Company video, the after segment was really blurry. So I was initially wasn't going to post it, but they was like, hey, let's just redo the after. So we've still only played it the one time.
That's right. But the difference here being is we've actually had additional time, an additional 24 hours to kind of reflect on a few things. And I guess you and I both agreed that was actually going to be a good thing for this.
Yeah. So we played it 3-player.
Yeah.
We played that early company scenario. We played with the events, like I mentioned in the before segment. And it took us 2 hours and 44 minutes to play the game. So let's kind of go through some of the things that were in the before segment. I said this was going to be a learning game.
Absolutely.
Nailed
it. Yeah.
I am 1 for 1 right now.
That's right.
So in saying that, we did get a couple rules wrong. There is kind of like a neutral player that plays. I completely forgot about the neutral player during the first round. And then there was a couple other rules here and there that we played incorrectly. So 100% this was a learning game.
Absolutely, it was a learning game for us. But what was really interesting about this game, as you say, is I want you to reflect on sandbox game. Right. So a learning game, what part of the sandbox were we in, and were you excited about that part of the sandbox?
So I was just, I think, going around and looking at all the different types of sand in the sandbox. I wasn't really digging my hands in. This was just like a mechanical, how does the game flow, what happens when this occurs, trying to get the mechanisms to become second nature, so then when you make those deals later on, you already can kind of see where that deal might lead down the road. Because you mentioned in a negotiation game, you need to have knowledge.
Yes. You need to be able to price accordingly what you're negotiating. And if you don't know that, then like, I guess I'll give you a promise cube for that. Make that 2 promise cubes. And that's just in our nature. Like, well, you offered that, so that means I should be asking for something more. Yeah. You know, like your typical negotiation. So like, okay. Whereas we found actually at the end of the game, I was basically cash poor. I was able to turn all my cash into victory points because I was able to get my guys out of office and pay money to buy victory points with the various cards at the end. Whereas you guys were cash rich, and you're like, well, had I known I was going to have this much cash, I would have been more aggressive in my trading and
with my promises. So because I knew I could buy them back.
You can buy them right back. So that's a part of the learning. Like, well, what is the actual value of this, and what's the relative value to you versus me, and who's getting the better deal here? Trying to sort that out was, I think we're still going to take several games to figure that out.
I think the more we get familiar with it, the more cutthroat that negotiation is going to be. So I'm actually looking forward to that in future plays. Right. Now, the other thing that I mentioned is that I felt like this was going to be a semi-cooperative game. And initially, after I finished playing, I'm like, okay, no, it's a completely competitive style game. But then, after reflecting on it, so this is one of the benefits of waiting a day, I was like, no, I can kind of actually see a little bit of semi-cooperative. Because what happened in our first game is you had your hands firmly into a honeypot.
That's right. I was the chairman, I had the presidency, and I took care of my people.
Yeah, but what happened there was if you have both your hands in a honeypot, guess what? I'm not putting any more honey in that honeypot. So
you cut me real deep, Shrek. You cut me real deep.
You need to kind of make it, hey, come on board. You can be a governor in this region.
Right.
Let's work together, because if you kind of try to monopolize one part of the board, other people might not send goods your way or might not send officers your way.
Well, and there's a real balance of power there, which I really liked about the game, because as you mentioned, I made sure that I was dumping guys into the board of directors there so that I could kind of control the CEO position. And so there were a couple swing votes where I had to give up a few things, but I could control that. And then I also had a presidency where I'm like, okay, I'm going to make sure he's getting all the good stuff. So I was sending him all the riches. But then you're like, well, wait a second. I'm the trade director here. I'm sending it over to the other presidency here. Enough of you. I'm tired of this connection. And then even I was still able to get my presidency bonuses that way and keep my engine alive. But then finally you said, okay, if that's not working, I'm going to just tank the whole company to begin with.
And then we need a bailout, and then all those shares you had in the court of directors,
gone.
Guess what? All those victory points are gone.
And so then that's, again, going, this type of game, again, when we talk about negotiating, you really need to know the rules of the game and what it is that you're negotiating for, because, again, being the first game, it wasn't very clear to me, although you did a great job explaining the game. So
well,
always, as always, but it wasn't really clear to me the consequences of a bailout. Like, I had forgotten that meant that Because before I thought, I'm like, well, we're going to talk about this in a second about the actual dice rolling of, achieving victory points. But there are ways in the game to achieve victory points without the dice roll. One is by putting guys into the board of directors, because each guy's worth a point.
And buying manners.
And buying manners.
Yeah.
And those are the two I can think of top of my head. So there's a way to work around that as well. So I thought, well, here's awesome. I hear I'm counting all my points on the board. I'm like, yes. But then you come in and go, no. Whoop! And I'm like, Oh,
well, and then there was another interesting thing too with that bailout is the timing of that, because all the executive offices get kicked out. They can score prizes at a penalty, but maybe, hey, you're the chairman, you're not doing what I want. I'm going to trigger a bailout, but guess what? I have a couple executive offices. I'm going to score more points. Or even the timing of when you're cash poor and I'm cash rich, so then I score. There's, like I was saying about layers and levers in this game, the more I've been thinking about the game, I'm like, okay, there's another layer, there's another layer, there's another layer.
And even with the bailout, if you think about the probability, this goes to the dice roll again, because I've been reflecting along a lot, because some people have said, people who rate this game poorly are really kind of twisted off about this. They're like, oh, a dice roll decides who wins.
Yeah.
Okay, but by doing a bailout, all the executive is gone. And so even the chairman, normally you roll the dice and he's either going to be removed from his position at a 50-50 probability, 4, 5, or 6 you roll. But then you get to the senior offices and you have to roll 5 or 6, right?
Or 6.
Yes. You get
senior
a 6. And what's the 5 or 6?
For the executive.
For the executive. So now that's a 1 in 3 chance. But they're kicked out during a bailout, and they still only have to pay $2 to get a retirement bonus. So then you're like, well, wait a second, I have a harder chance of rolling the die with the executive here that's not CEO, because now it's a 1 in 3 chance. But a bailout, I have the same opportunity as a CEO. I'm going to pay my $2 and I'm going to go get so maybe I want to do that instead. You're like, oh, that's not such a bad strategy. And then going back to your negotiation, me not realizing that, maybe I would have worked harder, be like, no, Jeffrey, we need to get these goods here to keep the company afloat, because I like to keep these guys, and I wasn't really greasing your wheels enough because I didn't know how to, or that I should be. But going the second game, I know. So it was really cool.
Yeah. So the other thing that you were mentioning about the dice rolling, how we thought that we were unsure of how that would we would feel about that nature of the game. I felt like there was a lot of mitigation.
Yes.
Especially when the company was taking its actions in the different presidencies. You could just dump a whole bunch of money into it to basically guarantee to do what you want. I think in future plays is going to be risk management now. I want to do 2 things. Do I put $4 in this one and then $3 in this one, or do I just dump 7 into one to guarantee? How much risk am I willing to take on for the company? I think that'll be kind of cool. The one where it was kind of luck based was, like you were saying, getting kicked out of those offices. The higher up you go, the better chance.
Yep.
But it's still just a chance.
So I think, so the ways you can mitigate that in terms of the attrition phase where your guy actually gets fired. So obviously, if you can work your guy up to the CEO position, his ability to get out of office is 1 and 2.
Yeah.
You got to roll 4, 5, or 6. Then again, you can work your way up to the executive positions, which is a 1 in 3 chance of getting kicked out. And then you got the senior officers, which is a 1 in 6 chance. So there's various ways you can do this. Is you want to work up the company so that you can actually increase your odds of being kicked out. The other option is just get lots of guys in there. So even if you have a lower chance,
you're rolling more dice.
You're rolling more dice. So there are and there are, as we already mentioned in this after, there's ways to actually buy victory points that rely nothing on dice.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious to see if you can do just one without the other, or
just have like a bunch of manners.
So then even like we were talking about before, is even getting your officers to become out into the regional areas. Is that a way that I can now start? Because then now we're introducing the elephant. So we haven't talked about that. Yeah. But the elephant's a really cool thing because he can also kick you out, and then for $1 you can pay for, or $2.
Pay the penalty.
You pay the penalty. So maybe now if I'm in one of these regional offices, that's a good place to be. I'm going to try to manipulate that elephant. It's not so much good for the company, but I got a good chance of revolt, and now I can get out that way as well.
Yeah, I've kind of harvested all the stuff from the region. I'm going back. Yeah, sure, I don't have a great reputation. I'm going to buy those.
Whatever.
Some French ambassador.
I'm going to be sipping wine in my vineyard, enjoying my retirement. And so that's another way where you can actually manipulate the gameplay to try to increase your odds of getting kicked out. So there's a lot of subtleties. You were talking about these layers of these risk mitigation, and they're not obvious after the first play.
No, and not obvious immediately after the first play, because so you're kind of getting like a first impressions and then kind of a later first impressions.
First impressions plus reflection.
Yeah, plus reflection.
Yeah.
There you go. We have a before and after and really after. So immediately after playing the game, I was like, you know what? I don't know if I like this game.
As was I.
I was like, the stuff happened.
Yeah.
I did stuff. I'm not really seeing how things are fitting together. I want to play it some more to kind of just see. But even after thinking about it some more, I'm like, you know what? I'm excited now to get this back to the table and kind of see what we can do with the game.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that because I was actually going to ask you this question. I'm going to make a statement,
okay,
and then I'm going to follow that up by a question. Okay, so your viewers probably already know this if they watch any of the playthroughs, but when it comes to looking at a game, finding the efficiencies, the combos that exist within a game, discovering what all the gears are and how they mesh together, no one I play games with does it better than you. Like your ability to do that is phenomenal. Sometimes I like to think I can do that, but step 2 is the execution of those gears and getting them to work. Again, nobody does it better than you. Right. And so it's really cool to see you do that. And so I was reflecting upon this game, and immediately after first play, you're like, I don't know. I'm still pretty flat. I'm neutral on the whole thing. And I said, well, one of the biggest gears in this game is the negotiation. Yeah. It's the what's happening around the table versus what's happening on the board itself.
You can't play this solo.
You cannot. And so then I was reflecting, I'm like, is that a reason why maybe he's still neutral? Because that's an unknown. You cannot predict the efficiency of that gear. You cannot predict what that gear looks like because honestly, the guys that you play games with, including myself, we're wild cards. You don't know what we're going to do. And so then like, I can't, that's something that you can't plan for within your overall game plan. Yeah. So I was wondering, like, I wonder if that's why Jeffrey is still neutral about this because that's such a big component. So my question to you is, do you think that's the case or are there other negotiation games that you like that I'm not thinking of?
Honestly, negotiation isn't big with me. Like, I cannot think currently of a game that I rank very highly as having negotiation as a key component. So maybe this will be the one. Maybe, because it has so much other cool things added into it, I think. Yeah.
I going in beforehand, I said that I had zero expectations going into the game, and I anticipated that I have zero expectations after the game. And honestly, again, I was the same as you. Immediately after, I'm like, I still have zero expectations. But upon reflection and actually starting to let the gears, let the game soak in a little bit, I'm pretty pumped. Yeah. Like I'm pretty excited to get it on the table again and to see how this starts connecting. And so I stay with my initial comment, though I'm definitely committing to 4 to 6 plays of this because on this one scenario.
Yeah, because there's multiple scenarios. Even within this scenario, it kind of sets up the same, but the variability of the prize cards that come out, the variability in the setup, because there's some randomness to setup too. Yeah, I think they're depending on the game states and the deals that get made and who gets promoted where and what decisions they make. I think it's going to be a fun ride.
I agree. And last thing I want to touch on for me is, well, when you're talking about this being a learning game, one thing I found in this game, we said this several times, is everything made sense. Which is really, like, mechanically, like, you read through the rule book and we first look at it, like, whoa, like, there's a lot going on here. But when you started playing through it, and this we were talking about before, this is one of these games you got to push some pieces to fully appreciate it. When you start playing through it, the game board is set up perfectly.
There's lots of little reminders.
There's reminders, and it makes sense. You're like, okay, I do this because, and you put yourself in that world. Like, I found I was putting myself in that world going, okay, now I got my regional office. It makes sense that there's a governor. And now with the regional office, they can sometimes deviate from what corporate wants to do, right? They're kind of rogue.
Siphon some of the tax.
Why not?
I got lost.
It got lost. And it's made sense within the time. So, like, for an actual historic simulation, and then once you put yourself in that situation, all the rules and mechanics really made sense. And so I think they're when you look at the rule book, you're like, oh my goodness. But once you start pushing some pieces, I'm going to argue that the actual learning curve to get into the game, it's high, but it makes intuitive sense quickly.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's our first impressions and reflections.
Yes, indeed.
Of John Company. We are both excited to get it back to the table. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Maybe a playthrough down the road.
I don't know. They'll see some. The problem with the playthrough is we may have to censor a lot of words during the negotiation period of things. So.
But yeah, if you like this video, go down and hit the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and as always, we will see you next time.
Cheers.